Paris, France. Roland Garros. Court 14. A packed crowd expecting another breakthrough from one of tennis's fastest rising young stars. Instead, they witnessed a straight-set loss that somehow became one of the most emotional moments of the entire tournament. The scoreboard looked simple enough. Iva Jovic defeated Alex Ila 6-4, 6-2. On paper, it was a routine first-round exit. Another young player advancing. Another early departure at a Grand Slam. But inside that stadium, the atmosphere told a completely different story. For more than 2 hours, thousands of Filipino fans had turned a small outer court at Roland Garros into something that felt closer to a national gathering than a tennis match. Philippine flags covered the stands. Families traveled from across Europe. Nurses, caregivers, engineers, and overseas workers stood shoulder to shoulder chanting "Laban Alex" after nearly every point. Even longtime French reporters admitted they had rarely seen that kind of emotional support for a player eliminated in the opening round. And when the final point ended, something unusual happened. The cameras did not stay on the winner. Iva Jovic celebrated professionally and respectfully, raising her arms after securing the biggest Grand Slam victory of her young career. But almost immediately, television producers shifted focus away from the celebration and locked onto Alex Ila instead. Because what they saw unfolding on the losing side of the net suddenly became the real story. Ila walked slowly toward the net and embraced Jovic, who just days earlier had reportedly celebrated Ila's birthday with her during practice week in Paris. There was no racket smash, no visible frustration, no dramatic collapse. Just a quiet sadness written all over the face of a 21-year-old carrying expectations far larger than most players her age ever experience. Then came the moment the internet could not stop replaying. As Ila turned toward the stands, the cameras zoomed tightly onto her face. Her eyes were filled with tears she was desperately trying not to let fall. She forced a smile through obvious heartbreak. Her lips trembled slightly as she looked up into the crowd. And there, instead of seeing fans leaving early after a disappointing loss, she saw thousands still standing for her. That changed everything. Many of the Filipino supporters had remained in their seats long after the match was effectively decided. Some waved flags harder than before. Others held homemade signs high above their heads. Television microphones picked up chants echoing through Court 14 even after the final score became official. Laban Alex. Again and again. Analysts later pointed out how rare that scene was in professional tennis. Fans usually celebrate winners and quietly move on from defeated players, especially in early round matches. But this crowd reacted differently. The applause for Ila reportedly grew louder after the loss than during several points she actually won. And then came the image that spread across social media worldwide. Ila stopped near the baseline, turned fully toward the Filipino section of the crowd, and pressed her hand against her chest. No speech, no dramatic gesture, just a silent thank you directed toward the people who stayed with her through defeat. Within hours, the clip exploded online. Sports pages across Europe and Asia replayed the footage repeatedly, many calling it one of the most emotional moments of the tournament's opening week. Some viewers admitted they had never even watched Alex Ila play before that match, yet the reaction from the crowd instantly made them understand her growing global impact. Because this was never just about one loss. By 2026, Ila had already become far more than a promising tennis player from the Philippines. She had become a symbol for millions of overseas Filipinos who saw parts of their own journey reflected in her rise. Young, far from home, fighting on global stages where few expected them to succeed. Every match carried emotional weight beyond rankings and statistics. That pressure was visible throughout the night. Jovic played fearless tennis, using her power and aggressive returns to expose weaknesses in Ila's serve. The American controlled many of the longer rallies and handled the big points with greater consistency. Tennis experts later noted that Ila's clay court struggles throughout the season resurfaced again under pressure, especially against players willing to attack her second serve aggressively. But none of that became the lasting image from Court 14. The lasting image became a young player trying to smile while holding back tears in front of thousands of supporters who refused to abandon her after defeat. Even veteran broadcasters sounded emotional discussing it afterward. One French commentator reportedly said, "You can measure victories on scoreboards, but you measure connection by who stays after the loss." And on that night in Paris, long after the final point ended, the crowd stayed for Alex Ila. Iva Jovic had won the match, but when the final point ended on Court 14 at Roland Garros, the scoreboard suddenly stopped mattering. The 18-year-old American had simply played cleaner tennis. Her serve was sharper. Her timing was better. Her preparation showed from the very first game. Just days earlier, she and Alex Ila had been laughing together off court after Jovic surprised the Filipina with a birthday cake during practice week in Paris. Now, they stood on opposite sides of the net after one of the most emotional first-round matches of the tournament. The score read 6-4, 6-2, but the atmosphere inside the stadium felt far heavier than a routine early-round defeat. Philippine flags still covered the grandstand. Fans who had spent hours chanting Laban Alex refused to leave their seats. Many had traveled across Europe just to watch her play. Some flew in from London, Rome, Madrid, and Dubai. Others were overseas Filipino workers who used vacation days and savings simply for one chance to see someone from their country compete on one of the biggest stages in sports. Jovic walked toward the net first. There was no wild celebration, no screaming. She understood what the moment meant for both players. As they embraced, microphones near the court picked up part of their conversation. "You played well," Jovic told her softly. "You played better," Ila answered with a tired smile. "Go win the whole thing." "I'll try," Jovic replied. And then something happened that television analysts immediately noticed. The hug lasted longer than normal. Not the quick handshake tennis players exchange before moving on. This looked personal, respectful, emotional. Two young athletes fully aware that one career was rising while another was learning a painful lesson in front of the entire world. When Ila finally stepped away, she turned toward the crowd, expecting disappointment. Instead, she saw thousands of fans still standing for her. Nobody was leaving. The Philippine flags were still waving. Fans were still chanting her name. Some supporters were crying openly in the stands. Others held handmade signs thanking her for inspiring Filipino communities around the world. One French broadcaster later described the atmosphere as less like a sports defeat and more like a national moment of pride. That reaction visibly hit Ila harder than the loss itself. For months, she had carried enormous expectations. Since her breakthrough run earlier in the season, she had become one of the biggest stories in international tennis. Every match drew larger crowds. Every appearance attracted more media attention. In Paris, organizers reportedly underestimated how many Filipino supporters would attend her matches, forcing additional crowd control near court 14 hours before play even began. And despite the defeat, those supporters stayed until the very end. Ila slowly raised her racket toward the stands. The applause grew louder. Then she did something that instantly became one of the defining images of Roland Garros 2026. She placed her hand over her heart. Not once, twice. Then cameras zoomed tightly onto her face as she mouthed 3 words with stunning clarity. "Laban always. Laban. Fight always. Keep fighting." Within minutes, the clip exploded across social media platforms worldwide. Fans replayed the footage over and over, not because of the tennis itself, but because of the emotion behind it. Sports commentators later said it captured something modern tennis rarely shows anymore, a genuine connection between an athlete and the people who believe in her. What made the moment especially powerful was the contrast. Ila had just lost in straight sets. Her French Open singles run was over almost as soon as it started. Yet somehow, walking off the court in defeat, she looked more important to those fans than many champions holding trophies elsewhere in the tournament. And maybe that is the bigger story emerging around Alex Ila. At only 21 years old, she is no longer simply judged by wins and losses. She has become a symbol for millions of Filipinos who see themselves reflected in her journey, working far from home, carrying pressure quietly, trying to succeed on stages where very few expected them to belong. That is why the crowd did not disappear after the final point. That is why the chants continued after the match ended. And that is why, even in defeat, Alex Ila walked off court 14, sounding less like a beaten player and more like the beginning of something much bigger.